Welcome everybody. It's been a great festival so far, and it's good to see all your beautiful faces here. And thank you to Sylvia for letting us have Mohsin Hamid's books, borrow them for this reading here. We have four wonderful novelists with us. And I'm going to briefly introduce you. I know none of you need introductions, but we have a debut novelist, Aisha Salman. We have Mohsin Hamid, Shehryar Fazli, and H.M. Naqvi. And we'll begin with the last first. Aisha Salman is a novelist and poet. Several of her poems, and I've read some of them, they're absolutely beautiful, have been published in literary journals in the UK. And I just realized I'm nearly blind. Better put on these glasses. Okay. And her novel, Blue Dust, is an emotional, philosophical, and cultural journey that maps the relationships, dreams, and hopes, and fears of three generations of an extraordinary Pakistani family. We're all extraordinary, aren't we? But I'm going to let her talk about that more herself. She is currently working on 2 more works of fiction and remains committed to an experimental fiction. Okay. He's, as you know, a novelist, and you know about his... So right away what we're going to do, so that we give you a maximum opportunity to interact with our wonderful panel, I'll ask Aisha to read from her new novel. And Aisha, could you please set it up for us, the portions that you're going to read?
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I'd like to apologize at the beginning because my voice is kind of a bit hoarse because I've got a sore throat at the wrong time. But anyway, I would like to begin by saying that Blue Dust, for me, is an entity in itself. And the way that it's written is quite unique because it's quite, it plays with the idea of fantasy and reality. And it asks questions like, where do we draw the line between the two, and how, and why do we do it? And it asks a lot of philosophical questions like that. So, you know, I'd rather that Blue Dust speaks to the readers itself. So I'm not going to talk too much about it. I'll read a few excerpts that I think will portray the flavor of the novel. But the issues that it touches upon are, to me, very personal, as they should be, I think, to all of us. These are pedophilia, sexual repression, discrimination, class discrimination, religious discrimination. These issues have all touched me and my family personally, and I think that we should all talk about these issues more. I think we don't, development sector organizations go to various far-flung areas and talk to the Gaon Valley ladies, and they tell their stories, and we come out with all these reports. But what we do not talk about them, you know, in more elitist circles, we do not talk about what happens to us. And until we don't start doing that, things are not going to change. So saying that, I would like to just read a few excerpts. Okay. They're quite self-explanatory, so I won't contextualize them. Alia took Zaid's hand and helped her up. They walked slowly to Alia's bedroom, where she sat with her mother on the bed, watching her carefully, trying to look in control, trying not to let her know how frightened and abandoned she felt. Zaid reclined against the pillow and fell asleep. Please don't take her away. She is not dead, just sick, soul sick. As she sat by her mother, Alia's blue powder days swept into the room, as if ushered in by the wind, caressing her hair with their distant warmth. Where was he now? Where was Asad? Where was he? Was he still waiting for her, somewhere in some secret hideout? He seemed frozen in time, unable to move past history. Safe in her memory, her body ached for him, even after everything that had happened. She wanted him to tell her how desirable she was. She wanted him to touch her. She wanted him in her bed, holding her against his chest. But that was wrong, wasn't it? But then she had always been the soiled one, the one to be mistrusted, the one who had vague morals, or worse, no morals at all. The television was on in the next room. Flashes of panic-stricken people running across a road somewhere filled the screen. A bomb had gone off in some city, in some shopping area in the old city of Lahore. The newscaster was straining hard to sound dramatic, but there was no drama to it anymore. Scenes of bits of flesh stuck to sidewalks and distraught mothers dead before their time filled her head like a die. Death had just become another episode in the lives of the thousands who didn't know where they would wake up, or indeed if they would wake up at all. The smell of the earth, her earth, filled her nostrils, and she felt there might be hope. Please don't let it happen again. Ammi twitched. Maybe I should get Amber for her. Ammi loved her dolls, always had. Can I read another one? This one is slightly more experimental. I'm very interested in experimental literature as well, so this follows on from what I've just read. She needs air, whispers, whispers. She pushes through herself and Ammi outside and pulls in air. Quickly, green lopsided mouth grins. It yops at her, hurts her pulsating head not to remember where the blue flower is, the one she picked with Ammi when she was little. The one Ammi loved and kept for years, her fingers warming silver-spined trees. Bloody ants on the wall, again, always there. It hurt not to remember at all, for any time at all. If someone had ever told her how long things that were around her had been there before she could remember. Mostly remembering small truths, like those, tended to confirm her existence. But she had not been told. Nobody would tell her, and that meant she was stuck on a firm point of non-gratification and non-reversal, in a small place of immovable inequities. Is that it? I have more, but I think that should be it.
That was wonderful. Thank you. That was really wonderful, Aisha. Thank you very much.
Hi. I had a late night, so I think I'll read from Moth Smoke today. Steadying the steering wheel with my knees, I pulled the last unbroken cigarette out of a battered pack of flakes. There are trees by the side of the road, but only on one side, and it's the wrong side. So the shadows run away from me in long smiles that jump over boundary walls and grin at each other while I bake in my car like a snail on hot asphalt. Knees turn the wheel left, then right, steering around an ambitious pothole, a crack aspiring to canyon hood. Fingers twist the barrel of the cigarette, loosening the tobacco, coaxing it into a sweaty palm, rubbing the flake between thumb and forefinger until it's almost empty. Eyes flick up and down, watching the road through the arc the steering wheel cuts above the dashboard. Foot gentle on the accelerator. Slide the ashtray out and tip half the tobacco in. Take the compass I've had longer than I've had this car, which is a long time, and spear the hash on one blackened end. Left hand holds the tobacco in its palm and the compass in its fingers. Right hand grips a plastic lighter while his thumb spins the flint. Sparks, no flame. Sparks, no flame. Then a light, and when the blue fire licks the hash, a sweet smell with a suddenness that's almost eager. Crumble the hash into the tobacco, crush it, break it, feel the heat telling nerves in fingertips to pass on the message of a little hurt. Knead it, mix it thoroughly. Hold empty flake in mouth by its filter, suck and refill, pack against the thumbnail, tip, tip, tip. Repeat, tip, 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 and twist the end shut. Incisors grab a bit of filter, pull it out, gently. like a bitch lifting a pup. Tear off a strip to let the smoke through, reinsert the rest to hold open the end, and keep things in their place. I light up while rubbing the hash and tobacco residue off my hand and onto my jeans. Rolling while rolling, solo, and baking while baking in the heat. It helps kill time on long afternoons, and I haven't traveled very far, but I know that no place has afternoons longer than this place, Lahore, especially in the summertime. 2 drops of Visine and I'm set. The sun sits down, evening. I pull up to a big gate in a high wall that surrounds what I think is Ozzy's place. His new place, that is. His old place was smaller. I'm a little nervous because it's been a few years, or maybe because my house is the same size it was when he left. So I swing my face in from the rear view and look myself in the eye. I honk out a pair of security guards. "Sir," one says, "I've come to meet Aurangzeb Saab. Your name?" "Tell him Daru is here." Access obtained, I cruised down a driveway too short to serve as a landing strip for a getaway plane, perhaps, and passed not one but 2 lovely new Pajeros. Yes, God has been kind to Ozzy's dad, the frequently retired, but as yet unincarcerated, Federal Secretary retired, frequent investigated, but as yet unincarcerated, Federal Secretary retired Khurram Shah. The front door opens and a servant leads me inside and upstairs. Time has ripened Ozzy's face and peeled his hairline back from his temples with 2 smooth strokes of a fruit knife. We crouch, facing each other with arms spread wide, and pause for a moment, grinning. Then we embrace, and he lifts me off my feet. I thump him on the back and squeeze the wind out of his lungs for good measure. Neither of us says hello. "You've gone bald," I exclaim. "Thanks a lot, yeah," he replies. Mumtaz steps forward and kisses me on the cheek. "Hello, Daru," she says. Hoarse voice, from intimacy's border with asthma, parched beaches, dust whipped by the wind. Very sexy, but not much to drink. I try on a welcoming, harmless smile. It gets caught on my teeth. Thank you.
Since I'm not reading from the beginning, it's a good way in. Just briefly explain the context. This story is set in 1970 Karachi, and the protagonist has just returned to Karachi after 19 years of exile in Paris to settle a family property dispute. And in the process, he sort of latches on to many benefactors who will sort of secure him his place in the city. And one of these people is a Bengali taxi driver named Ghulam Hussain. And this scene sort of gets at the heart of what their relationship is all about. A second thing happened the night the brigadier invited me to stay in his home. When we left, Ghulam Hussain drove absent-mindedly, humming a tune at the wheel, and often not really watching the road until prompted by the honks of angry neighboring cars to straighten out. To crack this absence, I asked him what the song was. A Bengali folk tune, he explained, and translated it to Urdu, which I then did my best to say back in English to myself, something along the lines of, "Let's go, let's go, let's go. From the skies the drums are beating, and the earth is getting restless. So children of the new sunset, let's go, let's go, let's go." The next thing to trap his attention was the disturbance near Kacheri Road, a procession being broken by the police. Outside a pharmacy, amid the turmoil, 4 old men sat on stools around a Ludo board, each taking his turn rolling dice from a little cylinder focused on getting his game pieces home. Ghulam Hussain slowed the car almost to a standstill, watching these 4 men. And then a puzzled smile occupied his face, and only after I coughed did he return to his senses and speed up. A little concerned, when he dropped me home, I asked him whether he was all right. "Haan, theek hoon," he answered distantly and unconvincingly. Then he returned the question, "How was I doing here, in this hotel?" I too said I was all right, but realizing that it sounded just as false, I added, "Man gets bored," using the English word for bored, one of those that had become a standard substitute in Urdu parlance. "Haan, Shabaz bhai," he said. He said that he too was bored, but as one can in Urdu without referring to himself as the subject, so that practically, word for word in English, boredom has occurred, making it sound like some foreign bug. And his idea of boredom was far darker than what I meant. We were talking about very different sentiments. I knew it was my role to console him. That's what he expected of me. In many ways, in most ways, he was so much smarter and more experienced and more able than I. There was everything between us that should have made him the knight and me the squire. But in an unjust city, I was now the one who had to lead him. I'd learned a new Urdu word recently for hope, umeed, and I rejoiced at this perfect opportunity to use it. Have umeed, I told him. After all, wasn't the country about to change? Without umeed, the world can't run, Shahbaz Bhai. He rested both hands and arms against the top of the steering wheel and now even put his head to it. Umeed, a very different word for him. But it's given me happiness to meet you, he said. Ha, to me too, and I meant it. But then you will go back to over there, France, this too. And that's when I said it. You also come. Casually, imitating the elite cordial Pakistani insouciance. You also come, why not? The problem is that the rich say to the rich and everyone knows the artifice. Oh, you're going to Paris. Yes, you also come. In a tone that suggests it would be silly not to. An aristocratic luxury being able to talk like that. But in Ghulam Hussain, I'm certain something changed. Now that he'd heard, not that he hadn't heard such things before, but because he'd heard it from me, someone who'd sat with him over breakfast in a cafe on Burns Road, who came to him in his quarters, straddled two worlds, I had no doubt that he thought me sincere. And in his moment of boredom, I came to him like an angel, not an angel from above, but more powerfully from the west. And is that why I did it, to bind him to me, to neutralize the threat he himself posed? No. It was something far simpler. I did it because of a language constraint. Expressing affection unambiguously in any language isn't easy. In a foreign one, nearly impossible. And in a lost language, just as much so. And I had, as I said, grown fond of my driver. Ghulam Hussain often filled in my sentences for me. When things got complicated, my Urdu got me far enough to communicate some general impressions and ideas, which through question and answer like a doctor, Ghulam Hussain then did his part to make out, explain, complete. But affection was more complicated. So how else was I to demonstrate that I had his interests in mind, that I wasn't listening torpidly but had his interests in mind? How else to say that I wished I could help? So I said it. You also come with me to Paris, and I put 5 rupees in his pocket. This, the onset of my betrayal, my birth as a con artist with this single victim. You also come, I said, put money in his pocket, and got out, closed the door, and walked up to my room in the Khyber, where I found the shutter half open, and my driver still loitering down below.
Ladies and gentlemen, Homeboy is a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story in the tradition of Catcher in the Rye, Huckleberry Finn. It's also an immigrant's tale that subverts the trope and contends with sort of the socio-historical vicissitudes that affect us all. It begins with 3 epigraphs. The first one is by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It goes something like this. Of course, all life is a process of breaking down, but the blows that do the dramatic side of the work, the big sudden blows that come or seem to come from the outside, the ones you remember and blame things on, don't show their effect all at once. There's another sort of blow that comes from within that you don't feel until it's too late to do anything about, until you realize with finality that in some regard you will never be a good man again. The second one is from Naomi Lazard's translation of Fez. Fez is the hour of faithlessness. I ask my vagrant heart, where is there to go now? No one belongs to anyone at this hour, forget it. No one will receive you at this hour, let it go. Where can you possibly go now? The third one is from a pair of poets,
who worked primarily in the early 90s, known as Eric B. and Rakim. They wrote a poem called I Got Soul, which goes something like this. It's been a long time, I shouldn't have left you, without a strong rhyme to step to. Think of how many weak shows you slept through. Time's up, I'm sorry I kept you. We who arrived in the West after the colonial enterprise, after our forefathers, heroes, icons, the likes of Sayyid Ahmad Khan, Malkraj Anand, M.A. Jinnah, found the east coast of the Atlantic habitable, if not always hospitable. But America was something else. The weather was mostly friendly, the people mostly warm, and the premise of the nation, the bit about your bruised and battered, or as my pal AC put it in his native Punjabi, twade, tute, pute, was altogether a different thing. You could, as Minnie Auntie told me once, spend 10 years in Britain and not feel British, but after spending 10 months in New York, you were a New Yorker, an original settler, and in no time you'd be zipping uptown, downtown, crosstown, whatever, strutting, jaywalking, dispensing directions to tourists like a mandarin. You see, you'd say, the city, it's like a grid. The theoretical premise of America had more tangible implications. You did not, for instance, have to explain yourself. Learning I was foreign, my college roommate, Big Jack, inquired, "Ain't that in South America?" Testament to the theory of symbolic interaction perhaps didn't matter, because it's not where you're from, as Rakim once averred, it's where you're at. Sure, they said institutionalized racism was only a few generations old and latitudinally deep. But in New York, you felt you were no different from anyone else. You were your own man. You were free. At any given moment, you could decide to navigate your way up Fifth Avenue to regard shiny luxury watches, eat a kosher hot dog on Central Park South, or a book at an outdoor cafe of Christopher. And sure, independence had its dark dimensions, its lonely, frequented loci, like a scarred green bench in the northwest corner of Washington Square, where nobody sought you out. You would turn up your collar, then sit with your arms folded regarding the masquerade. You were no different from the next man, bum, pot dealer, panhandler, booted malcontent, sprouting gelled spikes like lacquered weeds from his head. New York could be a very lonely place, but over the course of a year, these places became fewer and farther between. There was AC's Cluttered Cove in Hell's Kitchen, a fantastic and fecund place somewhere between Barbarossa's private quarters and a fin de siècle boomtown brothel featuring burgundy wallpaper, wall-to-wall rugs, curtains cut from Salvation Army dresses, a hammock, a filthy aquarium, a bonsai collection, and shelves upon shelves of books. There were books in piles on the floor, Toynabe's 12 volumes in the loo, and the Critique of Pure Reason propped up a wobbly, termite-ridden foot of the dining table. The pièce de résistance, a functioning fountain of a pissing cherub with a chipped nose, was salvaged from an estate sale and garlanded with strings of sewn jasmine on special occasions like Thanksgiving, Christmas, 14th August, Eid. AC's landlord, a reformed slumlord, was on his case for the usual reasons: noise, late rent, no fountains allowed, but also because AC had altered the layout of the 1,500 plus square foot apartment by erecting walls, compartmentalizing the space into a library, bar, sehen, and a random area bathed in blue light called the Blue Room. "This is my place in the world," he insisted. "I'll do with it as I please. Later, I'd be over reading, playing Speed Scrabble or Texas Hold'em, watching flicks from his collection, or dabbling in homemade hallucinogens. The first year I was in the States, however, I had only been over once, because AC was a man possessed then, working till 6 every morning on his dissertation, which he brazenly proclaimed would change the contours of modern discourse. Consequently, I frequented AC's sister's place, where there was always somebody, if not somebody else, over, and you were welcome whenever there was also the promise of a meal at the end of the entrance corridor, past the Damascene brass lamp, the colonial-era lithographs, and the silver-frame mirror in which you checked the parting of your hair. Minnie Auntie presided in the dining room like the oracle at Delphi, her large grey eyes peering into your consciousness as you entered. "You must eat something, child. You're cadaverous. What your mother say if she saw you now?" If you were lucky, she'd warm up a plate of killer nehari, transporting you home to Burns Road. Otherwise, you'd be treated to a homemade pizza or a shami kebab and butter sandwich. You'd also be treated to lectures on politics, love, life, the institution of marriage. Find a girl, child, and love her. Don't break any hearts. Mark my words, it'll come back to haunt you. After divorcing her husband, a good and proper chutia, she fled Lahore to find her calling in pediatrics in the city. A small woman, she had subsequently been reincarnated as Minnie, a one-word moniker like Madonna. And like Madonna, she was a one-woman institution, a pillar of the city's expatriate Pakistani community. To us, she was a foster mother, especially as she had not produced progeny herself. The third year I was in the States, Minnie Auntie was displaced by the duck. The duck lived in a swank corner apartment overlooking West Broadway, her parents' pied-à-terre in the city. They had another one on Fisher's Island, and as far as I knew, one in Aix-en-Provence. Her father's people had reportedly landed on Plymouth Rock and drifted down the coast to New Canaan, Connecticut, while her mother's mother hailed from French-blooded French stock. Blue-blooded French stock, though did not seem to take these things very seriously. The duck certainly didn't. She'd be at the door when we arrived, beckoning with extended arms, fingers clutching the air. She would hug, tug, seat us, and depending on the occasion or time of day, pour us port, brandy, grappa. It was as if she instinctively knew what you needed. All the while, her dog, a grey terrier with long silky hair and tiny black eyes, would sniff and bark like a drag queen. "Come on, Lyman," she'd say, patting her thighs. "Be nice, be polite." Turning to her guest, she'd say, "You're meeting special people tonight. People without whom New York's not New York. These are the famous Pakistanis." She had a talent for introductions. In her apartment, we met the veritable who's who of the city, from heiresses who wore no underwear to graying men with sharp features who would engage you with rarefied lisps. And just as you were talking about the hot new band that was performing at Badlands or the Hammerstein Ballroom, they would turn up for a nightcap, manager, groupies in tow, a little tired, a little sweaty, but because of the duck's hospitality, quickly recharged and ready to go. There would be great revelry, epic celebration into the night. And before retiring, at 6 or 7 in the morning, before that creeping, bittersweet feeling that the world is quite wonderful, but your time on it is finite, you would have breakfast with rock stars. Thank you.
I think you'll all agree that it was just such a treat and so pleasurable to hear all our authors, all four, read their work out loud to us. It's quite a privilege to hear you read. And I had another question for you, but I will begin by asking, is there a connection between your own love of reading and your writing? And do you read your writing out loud to yourself as you write? Because I noticed a distinct poetic rhythm in all of your writings, and I know that HM, you actually have rapped and done that, so you have that rhythm, and I know that Aisha, you write poetry, so I just throw that question out to you. And along with that question, the last question I'll ask, and then I'm going to open it out, and perhaps if the audience wants, we'll have you read again, if you will. The other question is the question that HM's character asks and responds to, it ain't where you're from, but where you're at. Is that relevant to your writing? Because I think you're all from all over and have traveled greatly and widely, and has that informed your writing as well? So, anyone want to take that? Mohsin?
On the reading and writing thing, I think, as a writer, you're shaped by what you read. In terms of reading out loud, I read out loud a lot. I mostly actually read out loud. Most of my writing days spent pacing my room, because I started getting this pain in the back of my neck from sitting in front of the computer. So now every 30 minutes my computer says the time. It's 4:30. Then I get up, I print out whatever I've got, and I start walking around and I read. And so most of my writing day is spent reading out loud what I'm working on, and just trying to use my ears to sift through the nuggets of nonsense that get stuck, in the prose. And the only other thing I'd say about it is that it's a funny thing, because writing, the way we think about writing is it's a visual form, but obviously the way that we deal with words is through a spoken form. So even though you read with your eyes, I think in some neurological way you actually read with your ears. So as for me, it's definitely something I do.
Yeah, I mean, similar answer. I read out loud, not just my own work, but I also read a lot of plays out loud, and just when I'm bored at home. It used to be trying to sing, which I wasn't very good at, so now I kill time that way. But also, in the as Mohsin said, when you read out loud, you notice things that you don't necessarily when you're reading on a screen. So it's a good weeding out process. And the other thing is that, as your work is published, and you're going to be doing a lot of readings, and in fact, even before the work was published, I was part of a MFA program at UMass Amherst, where reading was a big part of the program. So you end up preparing a lot. So you pick different parts in your manuscript that you feel would fit a 5-minute reading or a 10-minute reading. Once the book is published, you're at festivals like these, so it just becomes a very sort of integrated part of being a writer is knowing which part of your book sounds the best when it's read out loud. As for your question on place, where you're from, absolutely, it's it's obviously a huge influence. One of my favorite cities, which I lived in for 3 years, which was Paris, is a big part of this book as well. And just sometimes I almost felt like I was forcing Paris into the book, even in parts where it didn't belong. But the Karachi of this book, which is the Karachi of 1970, that I obviously never got to see, because by the time I was born in 78, it was already a vanished world. But it was always that Karachi of that time, which I think is it's the last moment that my parents' generation and their parents' generation have any real nostalgia for. So it was always around, talk of Karachi of that time. And so At some point, I knew I wanted to be able to live in this Karachi as well, and that's pretty much why it made it into the writing.
Yeah, well, as you said, I started with writing poetry. And with poetry, you have to read it out to yourself. Because the rhythm, and I mean, even if there's no rhyming, there doesn't have to be, obviously. But you can feel if something's not fitting or if it's not flowing well. So, and my prose is quite poetic as well. So, but now I just force my family to listen to me read out excerpts. But when I'm reading it out, it makes it more real to me as well, because the images are quite stark. And then sometimes if, you know, whatever is wrong with it, I can put it right. As far as where you come from and stuff, of course it has a massive influence. I can divide my life into 3 parts. One part was in the UK, one was in the Middle East, and one in Pakistan. And all of those places have influenced my writing deeply. And in a very positive way, I hope.
हमारे बुजुर्ग उर्दू बोलने वाले हैं और बचपन से हम उनकी शायरी सुनते रहे हैं। हमारे बुजुर्ग जो हैं, हमारे दादा यहाँ पापोश नगर में वाक़े थे। So the cadences of language as sort of part and parcel of my development, and I suspect that the cadences in my prose are informed by my particular background. As far as it's not where you're from, it's where you're at. हम पापोश नगर से निकले, अब हम तारिक रोड तक पहुंचे हैं, शायद और आगे चले जाएं।
But there's one, I said I wasn't going to ask any more questions and leave it to you or ask them to read again, but I couldn't help also but notice that each of you read in this lyrical, pathos, longing kind of a voice, and you know, as though you were searching deep inside and reaching for something. And is that because a lot of your hey, I do the same. Okay, I'm not making fun of them. So is that because there is that? Is it true that there's some deep wound that you're reaching for this writing?
No.
No. Okay. So I'm now going to open this up. Anybody have any questions?
No, I think got it. I think got it.
Shahryar, most of the characters from your debut novel, Invitation, seemed very familiar, like the brigadier, the old aunt you have in the book. Are they from your circle of acquaintances? And if yes, were they offended?
They're all composites of people I know. I don't think the people themselves have recognized themselves in the book. Which is probably a good thing. There is one character you mentioned. You mentioned the old aunt in the book, who is the only one who's borrowed straight from real life. I even gave her the same name, Apa, because she's such a fascinating character in real life that I couldn't change anything about her. So I had to leave her intact. She's about 95. She's almost blind, so she doesn't read English. So I'm safe there. But family members have told her that she's in the book, and she's been flattered, I think.
Hi, this is for Mohsin Hamid. I wanted to know, from page to screen, do you feel that anything is lost in translation?
You know, when you take a piece of writing and make a television show, movie, whatever out of it. I don't think it's really a translation, actually. A lot of changes happen in a translation. Marquez used to say that his translator, Gregory Rabassa, wrote his books better than he did. So a lot of things happen in a prose-to-prose translation. But when you take a piece of wood with ink on it and you make it into visual and auditory medium of a film, you actually are making something new. So it's like a sculpture inspired by a song. Something lost in translation. I think basically what winds up happening is you have a new thing, and it's probably best to accept that. If you have the ability yourself to shape that new thing and make it the way you want to be, that's one way. I haven't ever done that in too much detail. I've sort of tried to pick people who I think have some integrity and let them get on with it. But and the other thing is, one last thing on this question is, I think that when you read a book, you imagine much more of it than when you watch a film, for the most part. Films are pre-chewed food, imaginatively. Which is not to say that there isn't amazing imaginative leaps and equal levels of sophistication, etc. in film. There certainly is. But you make a book in a way that you don't necessarily make a film. So when you watch a film with somebody, you both can say, oh, we saw this film, it's the same film. But when you see a film about a book, you'll disagree violently about it. And I think that's part of what happens, that in these adaptations, the director or whoever gets to put their version of a book. And so there's always, I guess, if you are a reader who's looking for fidelity, there's also some degree of violence that takes place to your vision of a book.
A question for Shahryar Fazli. Question for Shahryar Fazli. So in an English book, how do you make the decision about how much Urdu to leave untranslated? Because I noticed from the passage that you read, even when you explain what Umeed means, but you don't necessarily go out of your way to explain the whole concept and how it differs from hope. And Umeed ki duniya kaim hai, you translate that bit. You leave things untranslated. What kind of decision does it involve about your target audience? Do you expect them to be completely bilingual?
No, and so you do end up sort of calculating a little bit, which is unfortunate because, I think editors and also come into that. I had my own sort of say, can you cut out some of the Urdu? Because a non-Urdu speaker would be a little bit lost. And my response to that was, it's okay if a non-Urdu speaker is a little bit lost reading. If they were in this country, they'd be a little bit lost when we switch mid-sentence into Urdu. But at the same time, I'm aware that so the places where I have used Urdu, which is untranslated, they're not missing anything big. Also, language and the character's relationship to the language of Urdu in this book is quite complicated. He doesn't speak it well. He's trying to sort of reacquaint himself with the language, but is struggling to communicate with the people who don't speak English. So that's another reason why the sort of the Urdu is a major part, not just of the dialogue, but of the theme of the book. So I think it needed to be very present.
Hi, I'm Aisha. My query is addressed to Mohsin Hamid. I loved your book, Maught Smoke, and I loved how the names of the characters were very strategically named, given that we've read our subcontinental history and, Dara, Shiku, Aurangzeb, etc. It's not a question as much, it's more of a request. I loved the way the book ended. If you could just read that last, in italics in the book where the excerpt sort of comes, how it sort of concludes the story. Thank you.
I haven't read this in many, many years, so here we go. At the ends of their stories, emperors, like empires, have the regrets that precede beginnings. As he lay on his deathbed, exhausted by half a century of rule, Emperor Aurangzeb dictated a final letter to his favorite daughter. I reflect now on my life with sadness, he wrote. Tell my sons not to fight as we did. To each I will leave a portion of my lands, so he need not make war on his brothers. But merciless Aurangzeb, who faced an elephant without fear as a child and ruled his emperor as a land of one belief, failed at the task of fathering sons unlike himself. The war of succession was again bloody, and the empire was by his father, too frail and too rigid to contain its own people. Fission of empire, a new fusion, then fission again as children parted ways. It is perhaps between hope and memory, in the atomized atomic lands once Aurangzeb's empire, that our poets tell us Dara Shikoh, the apostate, called out to God as he died.
I'm afraid we've run out of time.
My last
And
question.
we'll have one last question, but I just want to plug in something. All the authors have participated in an experimental piece of writing called The Festival. It's available at the OUP stall, and I hope you'll all get it as it's a memento that goes with the Karachi Literature Festival. And the book signing is at the book signing stalls that are outside. Was there one last question
Yes.
here?
I am Nazish here, and I would like to ask the question from whole of the panel that the books which we are, writing these days, they are only for a specific audience here, and unless or until the Western media appreciates it or grades it, we don't, get the chance to read them, and we don't come to know. What about the, your writings for the masses? And of course, English being the medium for the masses here in Pakistan.
Chekhov wrote at the turn of the century in Russia, and his novels were very popular, had resonance outside of Russia. He wrote about the anxieties of the middle class in Russia. But Chekhov was wide read not because of its anthropological value. Chekhov was read because he managed to put characters together and produce drama. And so books, a good book will have universal resonance. I don't think that, I fundamentally believe that books should be a good book will have universal resonance, so it doesn't really matter whether it's written in English or Urdu. Faiz Saab has resonance in Russia and the Middle East, and Naomi Lazar, Victor Kiernan and Agha Shahid Ali brought him to an English-speaking audience. I think if you volunteer, you can translate all our books into Urdu.
And on that note, I have to end this session, though I would want our... Oh, you had an answer for that too? Or? No. So I would have wanted them to go on reading to us all afternoon. It was just so beautiful, but I'm being forced to cut this session now. Okay, thank you very much to our wonderful panel. And a big hand.